As soon as President Trump left the Middle East after his recent trip, Israeli defense forces moved back into the Gaza Strip in some force, as they'd said that they would once the presidential trip was over. Thousands of IDF reservists have been called up for this, and we've witnessed Merkava 4 tanks moving back into Gaza in a strength not seen since November 2023, when IDF ground operations really began. Before Operations Gideon's Chariots was launched, these were the evacuation zones then in place. The IDF has now extended those zones where they say civilians should leave yet again and move into designated safe areas. From the IDF's perspective, the evacuation zones are their fighting zones, the areas where they claim the right to regard anyone left there as a Hamas enemy. So this is what the IDF's current fighting zone looks like. It runs along the Philadelphia corridor at Rafah along the border with Egypt. It runs along the Netzarim corridor north of Khan Yunis and south of Gaza City. And those zones will allow the IDF to cut the strip into 2 and in due course 3 separate sections for clearance operations. All that is achievable since Hamas has long been beaten in a military sense, so it's easy to see what IDF tactics on the ground are. But it is harder to discern the strategy behind those tactics. The IDF seem to be indicating that they will commence a classic counterinsurgency operation in Gaza, working to eradicate Hamas from each zone as they move on to the next, cornering the enemy into a small area before finally destroying them. But that only makes sense if the population stays where it is and is then made to feel more secure, more prosperous and far better off without Hamas around. Increasing the misery of the population by cornering them into a small zone doesn't make any sense as a counter-insurgency strategy. The IDF's fighting zone now amounts to almost 80% of the territory. And that means that the key ultra-nationalists in the government say something completely different. They say that the strategy is for a full reoccupation of Gaza, with space for Israeli settlers to move back in. They say that the misery of gardens will encourage them to want to move abroad if given the chance. Prime Minister Netanyahu himself has not committed to this, but he continues to talk about complete control over Gaza, whatever that means. Militarily, the IDF could take control of the whole territory, and it could cope with an angry and distressed population of 2 million Gazans herded into not much more than 20% of their own country. But on the simple arithmetic of how many troops it takes to hold an angry population in check, the majority of the IDF and its self-deployment reservists, thousands, would be fully deployed just doing that for a long time. You know, that's hard to square with the meaningful political victory over Hamas of the sort that Prime Minister Netanyahu demanded some 20 months ago.